Made the point, I've never seen the electorate so disengaged and disillusioned with politics. You said in the 1980s, 90% of people would take how to vote cards on the way to the polling booth. This is now down to 50%, with many determined to shun the process. What is the state of our democracy, Mark, when a party can win government with 32% of the vote? Two-thirds wanted someone else.
Well, it's dismal. Yeah, it's dismal, Alan. To stand on the polling booths now is a very dispiriting experience compared to, say, 1980. That was my first federal election where I handed out. 95% of people would take one of the how to votes and some would take them all. But now that's down to 50%. Who are the other 50%? People on the booths ponder. Who are they going straight in? They're not people who've got fixed in their mind what they're already going to do. They're mainly people who are voting informal, and that proportion is very high. The donkey vote or some form of protest vote against the major parties. They're the people going in seemingly with no interest in taking the how to votes and very little interest in the major parties. So the state of our democracy is weak. And what I put this down to, and I think Morrison was a classic example, politicians failing to explain the truth. You see, the art of persuasion in politics is just about lost. How many things did Morrison educate the public about? Did he ever tell the truth about climate change, where it's a dominant Chinese issue? Australia really can't do much. Did he ever try and go out and say, because it rains too much or doesn't rain enough, that's not climate change, it's called weather? I mean, Morrison was an abject failure in trying to educate the public about anything. And he paid the price, and I think Albanese will be just as bad.
Well, the economy, just come to that, talking about educating the public, $1 trillion of debt for grandkids to pay off. And then you've got this net zero carbon emissions, which is going to be self-sabotage, as I've called it, a national economic suicide note. I raised this with Daniel Wild earlier, but in the light of changing circumstances, do Labor and the Liberals actually think they can save the planet from climate change when China is increasing its carbon emissions by an amount greater than the entire Australian output?
Yeah, well, it's a very strange public mood in these so-called teal electorates, in the electorates that have been won by the Greens, the electorates that have been won by the Labor Party. And indeed, when you hear senior coalition figures like Matt Keane talk about it, Alan, there is a God complex. They do think that Australia, with 1.3% of global emissions, can save the planet. And there's a disconnect from reality. Unfortunately, in the public debate now, everything that happens is climate change. Rain too much, not enough climate change. Wind blows too hard, not enough climate change. Right. You have bushfires, no bushfires, climate change. Everything now is climate change, when you wouldn't need a very high IQ to know, hang on, that's just the weather. Or in terms of too much rainfall, it's La Nina, weather effect, structural cycle that we have. So that's one big problem. But the other one is this God complex of thinking little old Australia with 1.3% of emissions can save the planet, when, as you've pointed out, China increases its emissions annually more than our total.
And
so, all those two,
and they say,
I pointed out, they're running in the wrong spot. I mean, they needed the run in Beijing.
Yeah, that's right. And they say, what about the science? Well, the former chief scientist Alan Finkel said Australia's climate policies will have, quote, virtually no impact on global temperatures. But your point is that Morrison didn't explain that to the people. Where do you think we're heading, Mark?
Well, there will be a tipping point. In politics, there's always a correction when the system lurches too far one way based on myth and emotion rather than fact. And I think the tipping point will come with blackouts, Alan. We've seen the early closure of Liddell Power Station, Eraring. The news today about the green activists taking over AGL. That will bring forward the early closure of Bayswater Power Station there at Muswellbrook in the Hunter Valley. And we're not prepared. The system, Matt Keane and I'd say Chris Bowen, the new Energy and Climate Minister in the Albanese government, they're not prepared for the reality of working out how you keep the lights on when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining.
Absolutely.
So that will be the tipping point. The wealthy teals, the well-heeled wealthy teals, and everyone else who's been screaming climate change, they'll get the shock of their life when the lights go out, and they won't know what to do.